What's going on, everyone? My name's Justin, and today on Countercultured, we're talking about the new album 4 by Slash, Myles Kennedy, and the Conspirators. Let's get to it. First off, very clever title, guys. 10 out of 10. Or 4 out of 4? This record is straightforward. Basically what you'd expect from a modern day rock and roll band. You won't be surprised by anything on it, but there are several good, memorable songs. So let's start with the overarching structure and sound of the album, and then focus in on some specifics. 4 is modest in length compared to Slash's previous releases with only 10 songs. Despite only having 10 tracks, the album clocks in at 43.5 minutes thanks to the 6+ minute closing track, Fall Back to the Earth. It's just enough to satisfy your appetite without overstaying its welcome. If I had to describe this album in 3 words, I'd say polished but rugged. 4 doesn't sound like a grand production like some modern rock albums. Instead, it sounds more like a group of musicians who are just playing rock and roll together. There's a lot of room in the mix, and you can hear some minor imperfections in each part. You don't feel overwhelmed by the sound, like there's too much going on. In fact, for some of these songs, I think that they could have added an extra keyboard or guitar part, and it would have worked really well. One thing I did notice though, Slash's guitar parts are exceptionally clear at all times. You might not think anything of that at first, but sometimes I felt more inclined to listen to the guitar parts than the vocals, meaning sometimes Myles's vocals felt a little buried in the mix. Myles has great diction, and it's normally very easy to understand him, but I often found myself straining to hear his parts. I've noticed this in songs across all 4 of their albums now, and I think it's a result of a few factors. Myles doesn't have as much processing on his voice when he's with Slash, so his sound doesn't pierce through the mix in the same way. Additionally, Slash's guitar tones are bright and punchy and extremely recognizable, so they might actually distract from Myles's voice in that way. Lastly, I think they just don't turn Myles up enough because they want to make Slash's guitar playing the focus. It would make sense as this is Slash's band and the spotlight should be on him. However, I'm such a fanboy for Myles, so I always want to hear more of his vocals. We'll talk more about him in a second, but first let's talk about Slash's guitar playing. I didn't listen to many Guns N' Roses songs growing up, just the big hits, but I can instantly identify Slash's guitar playing on this album, as is the case with all of his other records with Myles & Co. His riff writing is honestly timeless. They sound like they could have been written 40 years ago, 20 years ago, or yesterday. In some ways that is a detriment, as it means his writing never sounds next gen, but honestly it doesn't matter. When you listen to Slash, you're not looking for abstract riffs or bizarre tunings, you just want some good old rock and roll. And he delivers. However, despite being able to recognize Slash's playing, he's not my favorite soloist ever. I think he's an objectively good guitar player with tons of talent, and his solos are a lot of fun to listen to. But I'm personally more a fan of the modern rock style of solos like Myles's or Mark Tremonti's solos. Regardless of my own biases, Slash's playing is spot on, and he still manages to sound fresh while maintaining his signature 80s style. There's not a lot of guitarists who can do that after 40 years, so props to him. Slash has some cool riffs on this record, like the opening track, The River Is Rising, or the following track, Whatever Gets You By. The latter song, it's not my favorite, but I can definitely appreciate the creativity that went into its composition. Another one that is a little bizarre is the opening riff on Spirit Love. This song is dirty and grungy, and I was instantly drawn in by that riff. Without a doubt though, Slash's talent shines through the most in the final song, Fall Back to Earth. This is one of my favorite songs off of this album and potentially in the entire SMKC repertoire. It's a great conclusion to this album, and it keeps it from fizzling out, something that many albums struggle with. It actually reminds me of Myles' song, The Ides of March. It's got that drawn out power ballad vibe with soaring vocals, uber melodic guitar, and a solid drum beat all the way through. Granted, The Ides of March is a lot more involved than Fall Back to Earth, but it just gives me that same feeling. Speaking of Myles, I've always been a little bit divided on his vocal performance when he's with Slash. Sometimes he sings with this full chest voice and his sound is rounded and warm, but then he'll switch to be more nasal and barky, and sometimes I get a little tired of listening to it. Despite this style having more bite than the other, it doesn't cut as well in the mix, and it lacks that epic power I've grown to love in Myles's voice. On 4, he mixes those styles together a lot, but his voice still lacks the oomph of previous releases, like he's holding back on most tracks. Though I don't think we have to worry about it too much. Myles contracted COVID when they were working on the album, and he was very sick while recording several of the songs. He actually pointed out in a Loudwire interview that you can hear his congestion on songs like The River is Rising. He said, quote, "That's part of what I think is really interesting about this record. We just let those imperfections lay, because it's all part of the story." At the end of the day, we know that Myles can deliver excellent performances, so honestly, I'm just glad he's okay. One other thing I want to mention about the vocals before we move on. I've never been a fan of Todd Kerns' harmony vocals. In previous albums, his voice is often as loud as Myles's, and I find it distracts from the lead vocal part. However, I enjoyed the harmonies on this album much more. I think they were so much better balanced, and Myles is never overshadowed by Kerns. It's a personal preference for sure, but I welcome the change and I hope they keep it. Now, let's talk about the drums. There were only a handful of songs that stood out, like one of the ones I mentioned earlier, Whatever Gets You By. It starts with a pretty lengthy and complicated drum solo that I was not expecting only 2 songs into the album. Additionally, I enjoyed the latest single, Call Off the Dogs, but not just because of the drums. Across the board, I prefer upbeat, high energy music, and Call Off the Dogs fits the bill. The song that precedes it, April Fool, is another fun, upbeat song for drums, but I didn't connect with it in the same way. I found the lyrics a little bit meh. Overall, 4 is solid and enjoyable, but I found it a little underwhelming. Its predecessors have had a lot more grit and power, and the album just didn't give as much energy as I was expecting. I think these songs will sound a lot better live when you can really feel the band's adrenaline on stage. There's a lot of good music here, and who knows, maybe as I continue to listen to it, the album will grow on me. Ultimately, it's in no way a bad record, and if you enjoy 80s style guitar riffs, bright, barky vocals, and a solid rhythm section, you won't be disappointed. So there you go, 4 by Slash, Myles Kennedy, and the Conspirators. What do you think? Have you listened to it yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you heard the new single Dead Man by Smash Into Pieces? They may finally be returning to hard rock after several years of subpar dance music. I break it down in this video along with the changes that they need to make to fully return to the genre. So go watch that one next. See you next time.